The one that really dropped your jaw to the floor. You don't have to know me very well to guess what my answer would be, of course. The famous line of Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back. Luke, I am your father. What? Holy cow, that was a shocker. Now, you might be thinking of a variety of movies depending on your age and the kind of movies you like, but other ones come to mind like Shawshank Redemption. What? Behind the poster? Oh my gosh. Or Psycho. Whoa, she's been dead the whole time? And if I give it away, you've probably missed out. These movies have been out a long time. Or Planet of the Apes. What? The Statue of Liberty? We've been on Earth the whole time? Or The Sixth Sense? Bruce Willis's character? What? Oh my goodness. Those are just some of the best ones. The point is, we love a good twist in our story, an unexpected ending that throws us for a loop. In our text today, we encounter something where we don't expect it, not only in an unexpected place, but at an unexpected level as well. So join me this morning in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, beginning in verse 1. It says this: When Jesus had finished saying all this, in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. So it says, when Jesus had finished saying all this. The previous chapter contains the message that Luke is referring to here. Now, I don't fault you at all if you don't remember when I preached last in the Gospel of Luke. I actually preached 17 messages for chapter 239 through chapter 6 of the Gospel of Luke. But the last of those was on February 3rd of 2013. So that's been a while. And the first of them was in January of 2012. We've also studied the Nativity account of Luke during the Christmas season of 2012, and that was 6 more messages. And the Passion account of Luke during Easter of 2012, and that was 5 more messages. So thus far then, I've preached 28 messages from the Gospel of Luke. But there's a large gap that remains from chapter 7 to chapter 18. So it's that gap that we begin to fill today. So we're picking it up in chapter 7, verse 1. So after all that, what was it that Jesus said the last time we were in Luke 15 months ago? The second half of chapter 6 in Luke is full of familiar sayings. Matthew records many of the same things in the Sermon on the Mount. They include this: Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And an analogy about getting specks out of our brother's eyes when we have planks on our own, and also a story about a man who built upon the rock and a foolish man who built upon the sand. All of that is back in chapter 6. So it is after all of this profound and deep teaching by Jesus that Luke continues the narrative by telling us where Jesus went next and what he did there. So we're told that he entered Capernaum. Capernaum was a small town on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus performed a significant number of the miracles and the healings recorded in the Gospels. It was also where Jesus lived for a while, after his baptism by John and the temptation in the desert. At Capernaum, Jesus first began to teach publicly in the synagogue. And from the surrounding area, many of his disciples, including Peter and James and John, were chosen. So in many ways then, this small town on the shores of the lake is the heart of the ministry of Jesus and the place from which many of his most loyal followers would eventually come. So what happens there? Verses 2 through 3. There a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. So we're told about a centurion's servant that is ill. Now this kind of situation is certainly a common one throughout the world, both then and now. There are always good people that we value highly, people that we care for who are in ill health, that we fear they may not recover from. This happens every day. The centurion was a Roman soldier, normally in charge of about 100 men, a position of authority and respect. These men were the backbone of the world's most efficient and feared army in the first century. But beyond that generic description of what an average centurion was, we don't know anything personal about either this soldier or his servant that would help explain how or why he became the man he is in this story. More on that later. But the centurion heard of Jesus, as did many people living in and around Galilee during Jesus' ministry. But what was it about this soldier, this particular soldier, that news of a traveling rabbi who could heal the sick would be believed? It would certainly be unusual for a Roman soldier to put much stock in local religious notions and local religious customs, let alone buy into the reputation of a local faith healer. One of the indicators that Jesus was no ordinary man were the extraordinary ways in which people reacted to him. So what did this centurion who heard of Jesus do? He sent elders of the Jews to him to ask to come heal his servant. If a Roman centurion paying attention to a Jewish rabbi is rare, this new piece of the story is even more so. The choosing of Jewish elders as his representatives actually makes perfect sense. They are respected members of the community that one would expect would have the ability to get Jesus' attention. So that's not surprising at all that he chose them. The unexpected portion of it, though, is the willingness of these men to become involved in the concerns of a Roman soldier. Now that will be explained in verses 4 and 5. We'll see the reason why they were willing to go. And it will only deepen our sense of wonder about who this centurion really is. But there is an assumption contained within the request made by the centurion worth our noting before we continue. When he asked these Jewish elders to go and speak to Jesus on behalf of his ill servant, he is assuming that Jesus could actually do something to help the situation. Why else would he ask? We have no idea what was medically wrong with this servant, but it must have been something very serious. Serious enough that death seemed imminent, and something that the rudimentary medical treatments of that era had no help for. They thought this guy was a goner. Now, for something so grave, who would try to find help from someone they don't even know? Only two kinds of people. Only the truly desperate, or only someone who is a true believer. It will be soon clear to us which one of those two the centurion is. So let's hear more about the request. Verses 4 and 5. It says, when they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. So Jesus, stop there. It says, when they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. Now, a man with authority and power like a Roman centurion could have compelled the Jewish elders to do this for him out of fear. But the way in which they carried out the request clearly proved that their hearts were behind it as well. There's something about the way in which people talk and act that lets us know how invested they are personally in the outcome of what they are trying to do. These men care whether or not Jesus chooses to help this soldier. The question then for us is why? Here's the answer. They said that this man deserves to have you do this. He loves our nation. He has built our synagogue. What an amazing testimony about the character of a foreign soldier who would normally be thought of as part of an occupying army. The last person we would expect to be friends with the locals. Notice how strongly they endorse his request by putting the weight of their own reputations behind it. They didn't simply convey the request and say, hey, Jesus, help him if you want. They didn't leave it up to Jesus. They began by putting their own opinion of his worthiness to receive help up front. And then they go on to list important reasons why they came to that conclusion. The first reason why the centurion deserves help for his servant is that he has shown a genuine love for the Jewish people. We don't know any of the background of this man in his life up until this point to know how such a situation came to be. But it must have been an extraordinary story how the Roman soldier came to love the Jewish people. There's a story there, we just don't know it. Somehow, some way, God enabled this man to develop an appreciation for God's covenant people that grew into love. How did God do it? We have no way of knowing. But God delights in using unexpected righteousness to fulfill his will. So we should not be surprised when he works in ways beyond our expectations. How did the Jewish elders know that the centurion's love for the people was genuine? He was instrumental in the building of their synagogue. Now, there have been plenty of unlikely patrons of the arts and people that support charities and other various altruistic causes in history, many of whom had ulterior motives, many of whom were in no way noble in that effort. This man is not one of them. We can think of people like Herod the Great, the man that rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. He did it for his own glory, not God's. He did God's work, but certainly not for the right reason. Or we could think about King James I, the man who has his name associated with the English Bible that was translated during his reign, despite the little-known fact that he spent much of his reign as an enthusiastic persecutor of both Catholics and Puritans in his realm, equal opportunity persecutor. The list of less than stellar patrons could go on and on. But this man, this centurion, has clearly won over the hearts and minds of the local Jewish people by showing them true concern for their needs with his own efforts on their behalf. So how will Jesus respond to this request? We know that his mission's primary focus has been and will continue to be the covenant people of Israel, his own people, to whom he has been sent as the Messiah. And yet, at the same time, Jesus continues to show an interest in people outside of the covenant, to the surprise of his contemporaries. So verses 6 through 8. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. And to that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." We're told that Jesus went with them. This testimony was enough to convince Jesus to help. By agreeing to go with them to the centurion's house, Jesus is clearly indicating his willingness to heal the servant. Jesus must have also, I think, been interested in meeting such a rare man as this centurion, along with his compassion for the man who needed his healing power so desperately. But on the way there, he receives a second message. Don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. The mystery of this centurion only deepens when he sends a second message to Jesus to prevent him from coming into his home to perform the miracle in person. The reason given on the surface is humility. He didn't feel he was worthy to have a rabbi in his own home. If that is indeed the sole reason, it is a remarkable one. This is a trusted man of significant responsibility, yet at the same time someone who realizes that moral authority and righteousness counts for more. That is a profound truth that has been lost upon most of the rich and powerful throughout her history. And it is even it is even beyond the grasp of those who just want to be rich and powerful and pursue that instead of seeking righteousness. And yet this centurion seems to understand the difference. He is not worthy of Jesus. A secondary explanation has been offered by commentators that involves the reluctance of many Jews, as we saw in our study of Acts, to enter into the home of a Gentile. If that was part of the decision, it shows not only understanding of Jewish culture, which we would expect, given his close ties to the synagogue and its leaders, but also a willingness on his part, a willingness to defer to those cultural taboos at his own expense. This too would require a significant amount of humility, or either that or a tremendous amount of compassion for the servant's plight. All of that would have been unnecessary, because Jesus treated Gentiles with respect, but it was still an impressive gesture on his part. No matter how we understand this request, the picture of the centurion as a good man is certainly clear. He is indeed a good man. Could he also be a righteous man? He said to Jesus, I myself am a man under authority. I say go, they go. I say come, they come. They do what I tell them to. We're told in the Bible that the righteous will live by faith. If this good man is to be a righteous man, he must also live by faith. That this man has faith in Jesus is clear by his words here. The explanation by the centurion that he understands the process of giving and taking orders has a clear intention when Jesus hears it. The centurion knows that Jesus' power to heal is not limited by distance. If Jesus says the word, wherever he is, it will happen. Where did he learn to trust so deeply in someone he has never even met? What reports about Jesus had he received that enabled him to demonstrate such trust? It's amazing. So how does Jesus respond to this request? Verse 9. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel. This is the heart of our message this morning. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. Apparently, Jesus is asking himself the same questions that we are. Such a faith is as wondrous as it is unexpected. We would expect the disciples to show such faith. They were, after all, at Jesus' side for miracle after miracle after miracle. And yet, their history of doubt and failure is well documented in the Gospels. We might even expect such faith from the Jews of Capernaum or Nazareth or Jerusalem. They listened to and they watched Jesus and they saw him on multiple occasions. Didn't they witness enough to cause a faith like this? And yet the crowds proved remarkably fickle. Lasting faith was surprisingly lacking from them. Those we would expect to have a great faith often struggle. Yet out of the blue comes a tremendous example of faith. How can this be? Jesus says this, I have not found such great faith. Even among the people of Israel, I have not seen faith like this. Jesus' compliment toward the centurion fits in with a pattern of unexpected yet powerful faith that we see throughout the Bible. It goes back, all the way back to Abraham and his story in Genesis, to the day when Abraham went to the priest Melchizedek, who appeared out of nowhere as a follower of God to receive an offering from Abraham. The examples continue with Rahab in Jericho. Where did she come from? How did she know about God and believe in him? On down to Ruth, whose devotion to her mother-in-law Naomi was surprising. With the raising from the dead of the Sidonian widow's son by the prophet Elijah. On into the New Testament where we see it continue again and again. We see not only this centurion in the Gospel of Luke, but another soldier at the foot of the cross who declares, surely this was a righteous man, when he sees the death of Jesus. It continues in Acts with the Ethiopian eunuch that jumped at the chance to believe and accept Jesus when Philip explained it to him. To the entire household of Cornelius receiving salvation when Peter brought the message to them. And once again, the whole household of the Philippian jailer receiving salvation after hearing from Paul. The point is simple. This is not an isolated incident. It is not an enigma. It is not a mystery, but rather part of a clear pattern in Scripture. It is incumbent upon us then to ask why God seeks out faith in unexpected places, and why he continues to find it there. Now we know why, that's the easy part. We know why God continues to seek out faith in unexpected places. He does so because the whole world belongs to God, and everyone in it. We may be under the mistaken impression that when we say that God is our God, that somehow indicates ownership, when in reality, it only indicates devotion. Because we are His people, His family. But God's concern and hope extends to the end of the earth. Every heart that is turned against Him is a tragedy. Every village, let alone nation, where His name cannot be preached out loud, is a great sorrow to God. God is not content to let such walls against His love and grace stand. So He breaks them down, He leaps over them, or He simply walks right on through them. God plucks lives out of the darkest depths and shows them the light of Christ. God reaches down into the most inaccessible places and pulls out men and women willing to take hold of the gift of God's grace in Christ. Why does God do this? Why is God always doing this? The answer is so simple. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. We know that verse well. Unexpected love. Inexhaustible love. God's love. That's why God does it. But how is God able to find such unexpected faith? It's actually an easy question to answer if we understand the nature of faith. If we understand the nature of not only their faith, but our faith. You see, faith is not like education. It is not simply some sort of formula where you put so much in and get so much out. A child with no support at home, a child that goes to a poor school, a child that has innate disabilities will struggle to become educated. We know this. We have seen it again and again. Only hard work and persistence can overcome such handicaps. Faith is not limited like that. It is better indeed to be raised in the church with loving parents and hear the gospel each week. Of course it is. But God is capable of saving souls with so much less than that. Why? Because faith is not earned. Faith is a gift, an act of grace in response to a willing heart. All of the positive support that we enjoy here, our freedom, our education, our prosperity, our churches, are beyond price in their blessings, and we thank the Lord for them. But they are not helping anyone earn salvation. Those raised in the church must approach God exactly the same way as the high school dropout orphan who becomes a career criminal. He and I, we approach God the same way, by grace. Because faith is not earned and can never be earned, it will always be possible for God to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It will always be God's delight to raise up people of faith where you or I wouldn't even look for them. God can do this. God has done this. And God will continue to do it. There's a quick warning for us to remember, though. The opposite is also true. Because faith is a gift of grace, even those raised in ideal circumstances can fail to receive it. Sadly, we all know that this is true because we all know someone who has been clearly offered God's love, only to have them rejected. God hopes that that lost sinner that has been offered his grace time and time again will come home. He truly does, as he holds out hope for so many. But he is not simply sitting back and waiting. God is out there looking for the next unexpected person of faith. There aren't any more centurions these days to amaze God, but God will choose one equally unlikely, an equally unlikely source to amaze us all with his grace. So as we look at this text this morning, we need to do an attitude check of our own thoughts and our own emotions. Is our attitude aligned with that of God? Are we open to all people coming into his kingdom to join us? Or are we trying to make a guest list that is more to our liking? Who have you written off as being beyond the grace of God? What type of person have you given up on because you just think God will never get to them? There were few people as vilified in the Bible as the Pharisees. One of the biggest flaws in the eyes of Jesus for the Pharisees was their desire to keep out the undesirables, the riffraff, and only let respectable people into God's kingdom. Their shame for that attitude has been immortalized in the Gospels. You and I have no business thinking like them. But I don't think that's the primary application for us this morning. I think this second point speaks to us more because I think we are open. I know we are open to anyone who walks in the door. So consider this attitude as well. Maybe you yourself don't feel worthy or capable of being a person of powerful faith like this centurion. Maybe you think your past is too dark. Maybe you think your faith is too weak. I can't do it. I can't be like that. These are not limitations with God. God can transform the vilest sinner into a mighty apostle. That's what he did with Paul. God can turn the biggest coward into a mighty warrior of faith. It's exactly what he did with Gideon. You see, you are capable of great things in the name of God and in service to his kingdom. You are. Not because you're any more capable than any of us, but because you're just the same as all of us. We are all sinners saved by grace, and we all serve an awesome and mighty God. How does the story end in verse 10? Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Jesus was always capable of healing. God's power is never the variable that we need to be concerned about. Jesus wasn't worried about his ability to heal this man. It was no big deal. The piece of the puzzle that is missing, the cog that the machine needs to work, is our willing hearts. When we step out in faith, when we trust in God, there is no limit to what God can do through us for the salvation of our world and the glory of his name.